All right, it looks like we have a really full house today, so I think that we should go ahead and get started. So if we want to put on that front slide there, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Kate Schlesinger, Retail Solutions Advisor for the Center for Professional Executive Development. And I'm really excited that you've joined us today to hear from my friend, Banu Palta-Hill, as she explores the topics of bias and inclusion. Before I introduce Banu, I would like to share a few words about the Wisconsin School of Business and the Center for Professional Executive Development, also known as CPED. CPED offers online and in-person programs and certificates that give you the modern, relevant skills needed to advance in your career. I know that many of you are alumni, so we're glad that you've come back to think about us. But all of our programs offer interactive and learning sessions facilitated by our instructors with practical business experience. CPED also partners with organizations to help provide customized professional development programs and coaching and consulting. You can check us out on the website there below at uwcped.org. I want to go over a few logistics before we get started today as well. So if you have any questions, you can slide one there ahead, Banu. If you have any questions you'd like to ask today during the webinar, you can submit those questions using either the chat or the QA buttons on the bottom of the Zoom webinar. We'll also pose questions that are submitted at the end of today's session, but Banu has given me permission to interrupt her. If you have a very pressing question, I can certainly be monitoring that chat or that QA box and let you know. I also want to mention that this webinar is being recorded and a link of this recording will be made available within the next few days. So please share it with any of your colleagues or friends that haven't joined today. So now I would like to begin to introduce you to my colleague and friend, Banu Palta-Hill. Banu has spent the last 24 years in the UW system developing programs to enhance inclusion and leveraging organizational cultural dexterity. In recognition of her work, she has received some amazing and well-deserved honors, including the UW-Madison Outstanding Woman of Color Award, the Wisconsin Innovation Award, and the Wisconsin Alumni Association Leadership Award. She's also a star. Her work has been featured in the Capital Times, the Biz Times, on television with NBC 15 News, and the National Broadcaster Association Leadership Series. So I am thrilled to introduce today Banu. Welcome. We're so excited to have you with us today.
Thank you, Kate, for your kind introduction, and welcome everyone. I'm very excited to spend the next hour with you. Before we begin, I'd like you to think about 3 of your closest confidants outside of your family and take note of their identity and keep that in mind as you participate in this seminar. So just 3 of your closest confidants outside of your family, and just take a note of, their ethnicity, gender expression, sexual orientation, all aspects of who they are. And so, and then I'll begin with a question to you. What is the largest threat to organizations today? And this is where, if you wouldn't mind putting in what your instinct is immediately in the chat, and Kate will kindly read that.
I will.
What is the largest threat to organizations today?
And you can find that chat bar along the bottom. Oh, you have one right off the bat. Lack of diversity is one of the biggest threats. Status quo thinking, the workforce, racism, lack of diversity of thought, staying profitable, silo mentality, accountability. These are coming in so fast. Differences of values due to diversity, retention, recruitment and retention. Ooh, favoritism. That's one that's interesting.
That's a good one. So
shifting demand.
These are all linked to culture. Sorry, Kate.
Yep, they're coming in fast, but I think we're getting the gist.
Yes, we have an idea. So these are all linked to organizational culture. And the one that I had in mind, that actually PricewaterhouseCoopers, who does a survey of about 1,500, 1,600 companies every year around the world, they ask CEOs about what are their top 5 concerns? What are the biggest threats to organizations? For the last 5 years, consistently, lack of engagement has been on that list. And lack of engagement is directly linked to actually all of the things that you've mentioned, because engagement is an outcome of culture. And the percentage of, this may surprise you, the percentage of the workforce that is fully engaged is only about 32%. So that means by engagement, I mean, you feel passionate about your work. It's almost like an extension of your identity. You feel it's a matter of pride to do your work and excel in it. And over 40% of the workforce is actually actively disengaged, which means they do the bare minimum of what they need to do to basically get paid. And imagine the loss of productivity in that. So with that in mind, we have to look at how do we interact with each other day to day? How do we make our decisions? And how does engagement, what role does it play in that? Because it also, engagement and culture are linked, they go hand in hand. So let's examine what is our world today. So we operate in a world of information overload. At any given time. So for example, you're listening to me, you're watching the slides, and maybe your phone's ringing and perhaps you're on email. Our attention is continuously divided. And we have this myth. In fact, in some organizations, it's even held up as some positive attribute, the idea of multitasking. Well, research shows that actually it's difficult for us to multitask and still be fully engaged in any one task. So the only difference is we might do lots of things and multitask, but our attention, we just won't do as good a job at each one of them as we would have had we had that particular task had our full engagement. And so this idea of conscious engagement has become an imperative for organizational and individual success. Because when we don't engage consciously, we're more on autopilot. So if I asked you, how did you drive into work today? Oftentimes, we don't even know, we're on autopilot. And so that's what we're going to examine. How does that autopilot work? And what's the science behind it? And then how does it serve us or not serve us? So we know that at any given time, there are about 11 million pieces of information coming at us. 11 million pieces. And only about 40 to 50 pieces are absorbed by the conscious part of the brain. So that means everything else, think of the brain like a hard drive. Everything else is getting processed and filtered into that hard drive. And we're not perceiving information doesn't get processed in the brain as it is, as objective. It's actually put into the brain after being filtered through our perceptions, our interpretations, our preferences, and whatever we are more drawn to or not drawn to. So that information is subjective. It's not objective. And everything all the associations that we form in that hard drive are critical to how we perceive new information. So when I talk about associations, think about a stove. One of my favorite examples is, when we're children, sometimes we might touch a hot stove. Well, later on in life, if we ever see a round red circle on something that resembles a stove, we won't touch it. We might put our finger on it or slightly try to determine if there's heat coming from it. Because what happens is we have billions of neurons in our body that communicate information through our senses that's detected by our senses. to the brain. And the brain is especially susceptible to pain or any kind of negative information. In fact, the brain doubles down when it's negative information and tends to retain it 3 times more than positive information. So not only is information getting processed in the brain, there's an association built with it. It's called a neurotransmitter pathway. And the more we have that experience, an association, so, a circular red object, giving out heat causes pain. So if I do it again and touch it, that neurotransmitter pathway goes from being sort of a dirt road to a paved road that becomes stronger. And we do the exact same thing with people. So our interactions with people out there in the world determine how we build our mental models about people that we are yet to encounter or the ones that we're encountering today. So for example, you have some opinions so far. We've been in this for a few minutes in this seminar. You have some expectation of what this next 50 minutes will be like. And that expectation is built on the information either that you know about me, or if you don't know anything about me, of people like me. So someone who this is below the awareness level, someone who resembles me. So a petite Indian woman, if you've had positive interactions, you're more than likely, your brain is wired to receive more positive information. If it's negative, if you had negative experience with someone that I remind you of, you may not be thrilled. Your brain is already looking for information that might match that belief that, I'm not going to give, this isn't going to be a positive experience. And so this is when we don't think about things. So the drive from home to the office, when we don't think about it, we just go through the motions because we've done it so many times. It's a paved road, that association. So we don't even think about that. And what we know, research shows, if we don't pause and engage consciously, we lose out on meaningful interactions and innovation and creativity and doing our best work. So what we do, just as to summarize, as we perceive information, whether it is through sight, hearing, smell, taste, all of our senses, we form a perception. It's an automatic interpretation of what we see or hear. And it's a hypothesis based on prior experience. So we start to perceive information and store it in the brain in relation to what we already know. Okay. And so that becomes an implicit bias, or sometimes it's called unconscious bias. And we do this it becomes a basis for mental models about groups of people. And so we develop attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding of how certain people behave, how it influences our actions, our decisions, everything below our awareness level. And it really limits our ability to make sound decisions because the only information we have is limited to that database. So if we have our brain, the information stored in there is with the same kinds of people and very little information about different kinds of people, different situations, different scenarios, we will just be limited by that, what is available to us, unless we consciously engage. And we'll talk a little bit later about how do we develop those skills about conscious engagement. And so we know that this, left to our own devices, if we don't engage consciously, this will act as a deterrent to our understanding of other people and of reality, of situations, limiting our ability to make good decisions. And these perceptual sets that we have, that we take the information from our, they're like roadmaps, right? Because we always have to remember, as human beings, we don't like ambiguity. So we always have to kind of be prepared and know what to anticipate. Think about it, for those of you, I don't know if this happens on all phones, but on an iPhone, if you send a text, you get 3 little dots when the other person's responding. If it takes too long and you see the 3 little dots for a while, it's actually maddening. You know, you get frustrated that, okay, come on with it. And then maybe the dots go away and then they come back. And pretty soon we end up forming a story in our mind, like what might have happened or what the response might be. So it's the process by which we select, organize, and interpret the information around us. And it's about our readiness to perceive something based on our expectations. So if someone meets our expectations, you know, that perceptual set is satisfied because it's based on prior experience, it meets our expectations. And it helps us navigate and eliminate that ambiguity. And the thing about implicit bias is that it can be counter to our conscious beliefs. So I can believe that, you know, of course I believe men and women are equal, that leaders, you know, both female leaders and male leaders should be treated equally or with respect, but my behavior can be counter to that. And that happens quite often because if we, especially for, say, I'm going to use women as an example, you know, for women, we're socialized to think about our safety, especially say I'm walking alone at night and I have to make assessments. I'm always looking through the lens of safety. That's how we're taught. And so depending on who's coming towards me, I make quick decisions. Do I change the side of the street I'm walking on? It's going to be based on external factors, what the person looks like, what gender they are, how big they are, how they're dressed, perhaps how they speak if I hear them, what exactly are they doing, their actions. So all of those things contribute to whether I have a fight or flight response, right? And those instincts don't go away just because we're in a building and dressed nicely and we're working with our colleagues. Research shows that we are always operating on that mode with the amygdala, the primitive part of the brain, unless we consciously engage the frontal lobe, which is responsible for our logic and reasoning part of the brain. Okay, so now that we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I want to make sure that we have a shared understanding of what these concepts are. So as soon as I say diversity, some people might hear, I mean race, or I mean ethnicity. Some people might hear gender or gender expression or sexual orientation, whatever dimension of diversity we want to look at. I invite you to think about diversity as any characteristic that influences the way we are perceived and the way we're treated. So the way we're perceived and the way we're treated, because in turn, it influences how we behave. So when I come into a room, if I get the sense that I am, you know, people aren't very excited to see me, they're not excited to listen to what I have to say, it's going to influence my behavior, right? I will likely have self-doubt. I may be, my body language will be very different than if I'm welcome with open arms. I'm going to come in, I'm going to project confidence, I'm going to do my best work. So we are constantly assessing, perceiving people. Remember those perceptual sets or mental models about people? And then in turn, we're influencing how they behave towards us. And then inclusion is the part about belonging. So there are two key components of inclusion. One is that you feel a sense of belonging, and the other is that you are treated as a valued member of the team or group or organization. So you feel like you are integral to the success of the team. And so there are two components. It's about this sense of belonging for the individual, and then also a commitment from those around you as a core member of the team. So to understand how diversity influences our workplace, we have to look at what research says about diversity and team dynamics. So we know that as soon as we meet someone, we in-group or out-group them. And again, all this is happening below our awareness level. We tend to go in-group or out-group them. We tend to judge this by surface level diversity. And by surface level, we mean visible diversity. How I look, how I speak, how I present myself, how I'm behaving, all of these attributes that are very much surface level. And the deep level diversity, we don't even get to that because already, especially if I've been outgrouped, immediately that there's a signal of danger to the brain. And this is called the social categorization theory. So within first 30 seconds of meeting someone, we make 3 assessments about them. How competent the person is, how trustworthy they are, and how intelligent they are. So intelligence, trustworthiness, and competence. Imagine we actually think we can make an assessment about those 3 components of someone's character. And of course, it's not true, right? It's not going to be accurate, but we don't even think about it. So we go about our day constantly in grouping and out grouping people. And if we were to pause and ask ourselves, how did we in-group or out-group that person? It will be very difficult for us to explain. It's kind of like when I talk to my middle schooler and I ask, he'll talk about where he sat for lunch, and he describes the cool kids table, the sporty kids table, different tables. So in asking him, well, who says that's the cool kids table? How do you know who can sit there? He can't, he's like, you just know. And so we never operate out of that mindset unless we consciously engage. And as adults, we have to learn the skills that allow us to overcome these instincts. And so this social categorization naturally leads us to expectations about how others should or should not behave. Just like who should go to the cool kids table versus who should go to the sporty table or the non-cool kids table, whatever it is. And what's interesting about this social categorization theory is that an example that always has stuck with me is one of my previous students. She had an engineering background. She had a bachelor's in engineering, then went and worked in the manufacturing industry, and had come back to school to get her MBA. And she, as an African-American woman, she was sharing her experience that, in the manufacturing industry, she would work with clients for a long time through email and a phone and so forth, and then meet them after a long time. And she said it never failed. Every time she would meet a client, they would often say something like, let me just say how you're Melanie. Let me just say how well-spoken you are. Now, they mean it as a compliment, but it's actually very demeaning. Why shouldn't she be well-spoken? She's an engineer. And all this time, why were they picturing her to look differently than a Black woman? And this happens all the time. And it happens with any aspect of diversity and we'll talk a little bit later about that in how we use that in our judgments. By the way, I can't see you, so I really hope this is making sense. I'm a people person and respond to cues, so please interrupt if you have any questions at all. So let's look at, what we mean, why bias is there. Why is it, what good does it do us? So we absolutely need bias to survive. Imagine if every piece of information we had to stop and think about, every decision we make, we couldn't function as human beings. And so we need some patterns. We rely on patterns. We need that. When it becomes detrimental is when we employ it in situations where we're making key decisions. We're making decisions about who's going to be on our team, who gets promoted, who gets hired, because then these biases can be detrimental to the success of the organization, and they have a profound impact on the access to opportunities for people around us. And so we know that it's built into the structure of our brain's neurons, as I explained with the neurotransmitter pathways. And our preference is influenced by our behavior, by our experiences, but it's demonstrated in our behavior. So, like I said, it can be counter to our conscious beliefs. So I can consciously believe in something, but my behavior could say otherwise. And I don't even have to say anything at all. It could be my body language. In fact, over 80% of our communication occurs without words. And when we in-group or out-group people, can they tell that they've been out-grouped, for example? Absolutely, they can tell. We had a student from Korea, and she said that people were really nice when she came here. But as soon as she opens her mouth, she often feels that people take a mental step back because of her accent. That's a pretty profound effect, that you think as soon as you open your mouth, people take a mental step back. Research shows that our accent is actually, we are very biased when it comes to accents. The farther away my accent is from yours, the less your brain will be engaged. We tend to engage more with people who speak like us. And we have this ingrained cultural bias about prestige accents versus non-prestige. Even at the UW-Madison campus, several years ago, there was a study done for teaching assistants. So teaching assistants with an Indian or a Chinese accent were looked at, where they tended to be marked down lower for competence and intelligence, whereas simply because of their accent, not because of their inability to communicate the material or not knowing the material, but British TAs, British teaching assistants, were automatically marked half a point more intelligent because of the way they conveyed the information. Think about that. We respond differently simply in the change of the accent in how information is conveyed. That's how detrimental bias can be. And that's how much it can influence our perceptions about people. And as a business leader, that becomes critical, because how do you recruit and retain top talent if you're not sort of developing these skills to overcome these biases? So I just mentioned, bias influences behavior. So again, if I outgroup you when we meet, you will know my body language will be very different. I will be more closed off. I might have my arms folded and body moved away versus drawing you in and being more open. My tone will be different. The level of attention and engagement will be different. The level of empathy. This is a core one because we hear often, a lot of companies are talking about, we want an empathetic culture. We want inclusive and empathetic cultures. Well, empathy is evoked through connection. So if I don't feel any sense of connection and I've outgrouped you, it will be very difficult for me to feel empathetic or to give you benefit of the doubt. And that becomes critical when we're in a work setting. And so research shows that as soon as you start to feel some connection with others, empathy is evoked. And when that's done, dopamine and serotonin are released in the brain. And with that, you literally feel good because you feel a connection, and we're wired for connection. In fact, there's a lot of studies that look at images of war. People tend to show more empathy, or the part of the brain that controls or illustrates empathy lights up more in research studies when the people suffering share an identity with the person watching. So if I see people like me in the images of war, the empathy is greater than if they don't look like me. I still will feel bad, but as far as quantity of empathy, when we quantify it, will be lower. So we have an affinity toward people like us. It's a survival mechanism built into our brain. So how does this translate? So I talked about, subtle ways that it impacts our behavior. And how does it translate to big decisions? Well, this is a very interesting one. That less than 15% of American men are over 6 feet tall, but CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, the men are almost 60% of them are over 6 feet tall. So no one's consciously sitting there and thinking, oh, leaders must be tall, but something is influencing our mental models about what leaders look like, right? There's actually even a statistic associated with salary. Like for every inch of height over 6 feet tall, men earn, I think it's something like $17,000 over the course of their career more over the person 1 inch below them. It's really, really fascinating. And then we see, we see that this is an attribution specifically toward men. What do you think influences, I can't see you, so you can't answer it, but, instead of height for women, we tend to judge them more by weight. We still judge men by weight, but we tend to judge women more harshly. So in looking at male and female leadership, a group of participants in a study were asked to talk about, come up with attributes of a good leader. What makes a good leader or a good manager? And so they came up with a number of attributes. And then the same group was asked to identify whether these words or attributes were predominantly linked to males or predominantly linked to females. So were they largely masculine traits or were they largely feminine traits? And only 10% of them were attributed to being feminine traits. And what was discovered is that, we tend to actually label things differently, label people differently based on who they are for the very same behavior. So, for example, for a given scenario, women were called bossy and men were called decisive. And the word abrasive was used 47% more in women's performance evaluations than for men. So our expectations of what a woman behaves like than a man behaves like are very different. And that becomes conflicting when we talk about the idea of leadership, right? And so this, for a woman, we think a feminine trait is for a woman to be compassionate and caring. Well, if we want a leader who is confident and, doesn't waver, well, that sometimes is in contradiction to what our expectation is in terms of gender. And so we have to reconcile this, right? We have to think about on what dimension are we judging people on? And how is that hurting or harming our ability to make sound decisions? So here are some common biases in the workplace. Ageism. So we have 5 different generations in the workplace today. And there's a lot of ageism. And in fact, it's on both ends. So we hear things like, okay, boomer, it's in fact, it's commonly talked about and people laugh about it. It's ageism. And then for younger people, for millennials and Gen Z, we often hear about, well, the kids today, they just want everything handed to them. They don't want to work hard. And so there's a lot of ageism. And then it becomes even more complicated when you have intersectionality of identities. So for women, to be honest with you, for the longest time, in my 20s and 30s, I felt like, oh, I'm viewed as being too young. And then now I'm approaching 50 and I'm like, oh, I'm viewed as being too old. I'm not sure when I missed that window of being an ideal age. And so it affects us all differently, but we all experience it. And then conformity bias. I think this is a critical one, particularly because there's so much emphasis on organizations wanting diversity. So we see on websites, in advertisements, diverse candidates encouraged to apply. Well, whenever we have any form of diversity come into the organization, so a new person is hired, and we're so glad because, we paid so much attention to making sure the process was diverse. Well, they start to get subtle signals. Oh, this is how we do it here. And we think we're helping them. Like, no, they get cues about what are the norms. And so pretty soon the message is either you conform or you don't fit. They're not a good fit. And so we don't know what to do with diversity. So that's where inclusion is critical. So we need to have an inclusive environment first and then bring in diversity. Otherwise, it's just a source of conflict because either people conform or they're outcast. And then we have a weight bias. We just discussed that. We have an affinity bias. We like people like us. We don't have to explain things to them as much. Our brain doesn't have to expend as much energy. In fact, there are studies. I don't know if you've seen the Stroop effect. It's basically the left side of a column. There are words in where the font of the word matches what the color is. So it'll say red in red font, red color. And then here on the right side, the colors are all mixed up. So it'll say red, but the color might be blue. And it's a lot harder to read the right side and decipher what, if I say, okay, tell me the font for each of the words, the color of the font. It's a lot easier when it's consistent with the word itself. So red with red font is much easier than red, R-E-D, written in a blue font. And what it tells us is that our brain will always take the easy route out. If we don't force it to, if we don't consciously engage and pay attention, the brain will expend as few resources as it can, because we're always in preservation mode. So our brain is scanning every 10th of a second for threat. Again, it's an evolutionary instinct. It's for survival. And so energy is conserved for those situations. So if we're just left to our own devices, we'll just naturally navigate toward and be attracted to people like us. There's even been studies done that if we don't know anyone in a room, when we enter the room, people with glasses are likely to sit with others with glasses. That's how below the awareness, all of these decisions are being made. And then confirmation bias. We are always looking for information that matches our existing beliefs, because remember, it eliminates ambiguity. We feel more at ease. We feel more sure of things. And so when we watch the news, think about the channel you watch. We tend to watch the news channel that reflects our values and beliefs. In a way, it would make more sense to watch the opposing views, because then maybe we would have a better understanding of kind of where others are. We could take perspective. But no, we are geared to go towards confirmation. And beauty bias. I mean, there are all kinds of standards of beauty that we have in different ones in different cultures. In India, for example, in most of actually Southeast Asia, the beauty creams with bleaching agents are a common product. In fact, in India alone, it's $1 billion industry. So the idea of being beautiful is equated with being white, with having lighter skin. And so these biases come into play. If someone is deemed more beautiful, they are deemed more trustworthy. Or perhaps more competent or intelligent, whatever one of those three dimensions are. And then gender bias, we talked about that with leadership. Attribution bias. This is the example that I shared with you of my student who's an African-American woman, that we attribute certain traits to whole groups of people, that somehow this group is really competent in this way, or they are not competent in this way. When I moved to this country, in middle school, it is in the 80s, I was always asked, either people thought my parents are physicians or they work at a gas station. There's nothing in between. And so that's what attribution bias is. It's basically a reflection, again, of the limited information in that database in the brain. Name bias. Oftentimes when we have a difficult name to pronounce, especially if it's a foreign name, people are asked, oh, well, what do you go by? Instead of thinking, well, that's my name, that's what I go by. And so there's almost an expectation that the person will have an American name and then their real name. And then, of course, the height bias we talked about. I'm going to run through a few of these in the next 5 minutes and then make sure that we have time for questions. So we covered this, right? That we have an affinity toward people who share our backgrounds, who share our values, our hobbies, our interests, and have had similar experiences, like going to the same school or, share our religion or nationality and so forth. So this idea of belonging is critical, because we've talked a lot about the person who has the bias, or all of us, as the people keeping the bias. But what about all of us as the people who are recipients of bias? we have to talk about belonging, because belonging is a fundamental human motivation. It gives us psychological safety. So think about if you're walking down the hall or even the street, you say hello to someone, smile at them. They just look at you like this, or they look down on their phone. Sometimes it really stays with you and it bothers you, right? Especially for in a especially kind of sensitive state of mind. Like, what's their problem? They don't say hello. And that is critical to our need for belonging, because our belonging is controlled by the same part of the brain as our need for food and physical safety. And belonging gives us psychological safety. If we don't feel psychologically safe, we can't function. And so remember, belonging, like we talked about in inclusion, the definition of inclusion, it has to do with that you feel a sense of commitment and support from the people around you to do your best work, that you feel like you're integral to the success of the team or the organization. And if you don't feel that, it means you don't feel seen. You don't feel validated. And that is a fundamental need, to feel validated. And if we don't feel validated and we don't feel we belong, we can't innovate, we can't be creative, we can't perform. In fact, without belonging, people spend their time seeking validation by creating value for themselves instead of for the team. And at its very worst, people will do everything they can, sometimes even to the detriment of the team, because they are looking for that validation. Not because they're bad people, but because that's a fundamental human need. So what do we do? So, you're probably wondering, okay, you've laid out this picture. What do you want us to do about it? Well, first and foremost, exactly what we're doing. So understanding how we interact. It's not about being bad people, good people. Most of us see ourselves as good people, but we have tendencies and instincts and that basically get in the way of being making good decisions or being fair, however you want to look at it. So the way, first and foremost, is the self-awareness. So looking for inconsistencies between our conscious beliefs and our instincts. I'll give you an example. Right across from my office, across from the business school on campus, we have Porch Light. It's a homeless shelter. And a few years ago, I was cutting through, there's an alleyway that links the business school toward the chemistry building. And I went through the alleyway. There was a woman who came out of the side door. She had disheveled hair. She didn't have very many teeth. She was wearing her pajamas and no shoes. And immediately, I looked down on my phone. I didn't even think about it. I looked down on my phone and I just walked fast. And then the woman actually said, hey, how are you doing today? You look good today, or something very positive. And I felt so ashamed. Why did I not see her or pretend not to see her? That was my initial reaction, because somehow I have some idea. Is it that, of course, I think if just because you right now, a person might be in a state where they're not able to afford housing, that what kind of biases do I hold about homelessness? Consciously, I like to think I don't hold any, but clearly my behavior reflected otherwise. So looking for those inconsistencies can help provide some windows into what our tendencies are, at least what our limitations are in terms of understanding and having full information. And then what do we do? Curiosity. I think really engaging in asking questions and going out of your comfort zone. This whole idea of paying attention to surprises and discomfort. One way you can encourage yourself to put yourself in discomfort is by saying, anytime you're uncomfortable, you are literally growing. Literally. You remember those neurotransmitter pathways? If we were in person, I would draw it on a whiteboard and show you. It's kind of like tree branches. When we form associations, we start to grow those associations. We literally grow when we're in discomfort, because the information around us when we're in discomfort does not match our perceptual set, does not match our expectations. Therefore, the brain is forced to create new associations. And that's where we want to be, because we're expanding that database. And then empathy, practicing empathy. I think that human connection is so, so critical. We often focus on, well, we celebrate diversity, we celebrate differences. There has to be a core connection as well. One of my favorite examples is a few years ago, I got to spend a week at the Procter & Gamble headquarters in Cincinnati. And I spent time with their chief diversity officer, who shared this study with me that they followed a generation of people across cultures, so different parts of the world. And they looked at, when are our biases the least? When are we least biased throughout our life, from birth to death? And of course, my instinct was to think at birth or when we're children. But what they found was really surprising. It's when we're really old, when we're in people in nursing homes or being taken care of by their family members in other parts of the world, when we're near death, toward end of life. Because what happens is that experience of being at the end of life is so powerful, that shared experience, everything else seems to dissipate. And so when you think about your teams and organizations, it's critical to have these shared experiences that draw everybody so closely knit that their differences serve as strengths. They serve to innovate rather than to as an inhibitor to progress. So as far as the real actions, here are some common acts of exclusion. You'll have access to this after the seminar, so please feel free. I won't go through each one of these, but common one is checking our phone during a conversation. I think we do this more for efficiency, but actually it's a very, very basic thing that makes us feel not seen or not heard. I want to focus the last minute or so on the conscious acts of inclusion, acknowledging people. So saying hello, we take it for granted. We often don't do it because efficiency, right? We get into a meeting, we immediately go down the agenda. We think that's valued. Research shows that is not the way that people get on board. That actually the people that are listened to, influential leaders, are those that acknowledge people for being an individual and accept them, their authenticity, but then also make them feel like they are a critical part of the organization. And so here are some ways that you can start to incorporate on a day-to-day basis. Just saying hello, demonstrating curiosity. What is your heritage? Like, we often ask people if they have an accent, like, where are you from? Oh, where did you grow up? But actually, we can ask anyone, what is their heritage? How do you celebrate this or that? What holidays do you celebrate? We don't have to link it to an accent. So that's just an example. And then being a partner in learning, having an organization where you can tell each other, hey, I'm going to go through my day and commit, have comments or commit microaggressions, as we call them, or, unintended sort of slights, please tell me, because how will I know if I'm not told that you have permission to tell me? So create a culture of feedback. Lastly, I want to share this with you. We are not, no one is immune to bias. This is a famous quote by Reverend Jesse Jackson, who talked about walking down a street in Washington, D.C. And he said, there's nothing more painful to me at this stage in my life than to walk down the street and hear footsteps, then turn around and see somebody white and feel relieved. So we are all susceptible to the messages around us about what's safe, what's not. So thank you. And I'll turn it back over to Kate for questions.
All right. Well, thank you, Banu. This has just been really powerful session. We're really grateful. There was a lot of really great chat going on throughout. So this is a time we're going to open it up. We have a few minutes left to open it up for some question and answers. I want to remind you to use the chat bar at the bottom. There's the chat box. I know there's been a lot of questions in there, and then you can use the Q&A, the question and answer box as well. So there was several questions. Some of them I think we'll handle sort of one-off, Banu, maybe as a follow-up with you later, but there was one that's more relevant for everybody. Is there positive attribution bias?
Yeah, there is, absolutely. So there are positive attribution biases. So for example, I mean, as an Indian, people always assume I'm good at math, when in fact, I'm really not. And so on the surface, it seems like a positive attribution, but actually now that, we have second, third, fourth generation of Indian immigrants in the country, there are some researchers doing work in that area that talk about what kind of pressures it puts on that generation, what kind of pressure it puts on when it's a positive, like you are not living up to the attribution that people have of your people. So rather than being viewed as an individual. So it may seem like a positive bias, and one can even benefit from it, right? But in the long run, there are studies that show that it has a toll on mental health.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. The next question is, what is your definition of empathy? You talked about it quite a bit throughout the session today.
Yeah, I think empathy is about perspective taking. So being able to stand in the shoes of someone else. It has to do with, are we able to experience that, the feeling of, so even though something that I disagree with, I may completely, like, instead of negating it and saying, well, that never happened to me, I don't know, I never see that. That rather I can see how this person walks through their day. And we know that our daily lived experience is defined by a lot of our external attributes, how we look, how we speak, how we come across. People judge us on that.
That was excellent. Thank you. All right. Well, I think that is probably all the time we have for questions. If you just want to move forward, I would love to share a little bit more about some of the programs that we offer. So again, thank you so much, Banu. There's more questions coming in.
Yeah. So telling others about your heritage backfires often, especially when you look or part of, oops. What would be helpful is to know how it backfires. What I mean is that when we talk about, oftentimes we'll say things like, where are you from? For example, I grew up in Madison. I always think, oh, I'm from Madison. But a lot of times people say things like, no, but where are you really from? And I know there's no harm meant, but it does kind of make you feel like, oh, my ownership of being a Madisonian is sort of discarded. So I think saying something about, what's your heritage? Or what's your background? What's your family background? That's helpful. I'm sorry, Jamie, you had a question about how does once surpassed such backfire, I'm happy to talk to you about it. I wanted to learn more about your question.
Yes, and there were several questions about having you come out to do corporate groups or have, specific conversations with other organizations, and that's exactly what we do. So again, thank you so much, Banu. We would love to have you, she would love to come out to any of your organizations, and we can certainly help coordinate that for you. So before we end, I did just want to let you know about some of our additional opportunities for you to continue your DEI journey. So we do have 3 DEI focused programs coming up. So Banu, if you scooch ahead about 3 slides or 2 slides, I think you can show those, because some of them have very upcoming dates coming up in the spring here. So these programs are going to equip you with all the tools that you're going to need to really commit to your own DEI priorities and practices. We can also customize any of these programs in diversity, equity, inclusion at your organization. So as one of you asked, we are happy to have Banu or any of our other colleagues that teach this content to come out to your organization in a customized approach. So we just want to, again, thank you for attending today's webinar. We look forward to the opportunity to continue to work with you during your own personal DEI journey. So thank you, Banu, and thank you all of us for being with us today.
Thank you, everyone. And if you have any questions about today, please feel free to connect with me. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody.